Hello and welcome to Wingin It. So this is part two of the European Expansion Bootcamp, where we help players get ready for the release of the European expansion for Wingspan, which is coming to the digital version very soon. So joining me today, I have got Tay from Tuck and Cash. So welcome, Tay. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Thanks for doing this series with me. I think this is yeah, like I said, a good opportunity to introduce some of these new bird powers and new mechanics that we have in the European expansion. So if you've not seen part one, we took a look at the teal round end powers. So that's over on Tere's channel, which is Tuck and Cash. So yeah, definitely check that out. But today we are going to be taking a look at the five brand new pink powers in the European expansion. So yeah, there's a number of pink powers in the base game, of course, but there's a few new ones in the expansion that bring some interesting new mechanics and ways to generate extra resources or extra points, depending on what your opponents are doing on their turns. So I think we'll start by taking a look at the two on the top row. So these allow you to gain food when one of your opponents gains food on their turn. So what are your thoughts on these two birds, Tero?
I mean, my impression is they are strong power because I just think like I've played base game for so long and I understand I feel like food generation is always such a struggle in base game. Like you either have to build up a forest or you have to use other birds that generate you food. But food is just such a key resources, especially in early game, to build up your board. So being able to generate food passively, my first impression, like it gotta be a strong power.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think if you can have, either the tree sparrow or the golden oriole, if you can play that really early in the game, that's just going to get you so much food. But I think especially, like you say, in that early game, you know that your opponents are going to be going for food as well because they're going to be trying to get birds down. So if this can help you get some extra food, it's just going to accelerate your tempo in terms of getting birds down. But yeah, I mean, if you had to pick one of these two birds as being stronger than the other, which would you go for?
Ooh, I mean this is a tough one. I mean, if you look at the food that you gain, they're different. So for the tree swallow, you gain the grain, but with the Oreo, you gain either a cherry or grub. I mean, obviously, it's always good to have more option. So you would like to gain two different type of food, and but the Oreo is a little bit more expensive. So I would say like I would love to play the Oreo, but realistically, it might be easier to play the tree swallow in, say, round one.
Yeah, I think I have to agree. I think I prefer the Oriole as an option to get down. Certainly
Hmm.
if you can afford that food. But yeah, early in the game, if you say keep two birds and three food from your hand, if you play the Oriole, that's all your food spent. So you're going to need to
Yeah.
be getting some activations from that really quickly. The Star Nest is obviously really nice and can certainly come into play with end of round goals as well. But yeah, that Tree Sparrow, I think two food for 3 points of 4x spaces is already a pretty good return. So
Yes.
just having that chance of getting some extra food throughout the game, certainly very, very nice.
Yeah, I like the fact that you can play this in the forest. So, you can kind of use them as a filler bird for the forest already. So
Right.
you're building up your forest while gaining potential passive food. I guess one question that I have, for example, if you start with the Oreo, I mean, what do you think about the idea of just committing all your food and play the Oreo right at the start? Do you think that's a viable strategy?
I think it's risky. I think it is going to rely on
Hmm.
your opponents cooperating because, particularly in a 1v1 game, if your opponent sees you play this straight away, they might delay gaining food for a couple of turns and maybe start building up their wetlands, drawing birds laying
Hmm.
eggs, and really avoiding taking that game food action because
Yeah.
they know that it's going to benefit you and can potentially save you turns from having to gain food. So, yeah, I think you do have to be careful. But yeah, another point to make is just these kind of birds, like with all the pink powers, they're going to stack really well the more players that you're playing against. So certainly, I think in a three or a four or even a five-player game, you can expect to get some food from these pretty early on.
Yeah. I guess one last thing, I would like to kind of point out as well, like the food are not guaranteed. So
Mm,
you have to pay from the feeder. So potentially if your opponent want to, they can also manipulate the feeder in a way that they deny you the food. So
yeah, and that certainly feels like one of the drawbacks. I think particularly with the Eurasian tree sparrow,
hmm
where you only get a choice of one food. Yeah, if your opponent is going for food and they take the only seed, well, tough luck. You're not going to get any food. At
yeah.
least with the at least with the Oriole, you have a couple of chances, maybe being able to get some food from that.
Yeah. Yeah. Overall still strong bird that I look forward to playing if I have them and I can afford them.
Definitely, definitely. All right, so we can move on to some of the other birds. So let's take a look at the common cuckoo. So
All
this
right.
is similar to some of the pink powers that we have in the base game, which lets you lay eggs on certain nest types when your opponent takes the lay eggs action. Now, the interesting thing about the cuckoo is that it allows you to lay eggs on two different kinds of nests. So we've got bowl
Yes.
nests and ground nests. So how do you compare this type of pink power to the egg laying that we have in the base game?
Yeah, I think in terms of the food to bird point ratio, they're pretty comparable to ping, like similar ping power from the base game. For example, the cowbird is 2 food for 5 points,
Yeah.
but here you only get 4 points, but more flexible ping power. So I think, yeah, they're comparable.
Yeah, I think it's the flexibility in the nests you can
Mhm.
lay in, but also the flexibility in the habitat. So,
Yes.
potentially this could be, a reasonably good filler bird in the forest,
hmm
just to help
Yes.
extend that forest out, get you more food. But yeah, I mean,
hmm
one of the problems that I often run into with these kind of pink egg laying powers, I think particularly with the cowbirds, if you don't have that bowl nest early on, it can be really
Mm,
tricky to actually benefit from this. But just
yes.
having a choice of two different nests, I think this becomes a more viable first round play because chances are that you are going to have at least one bowl or ground nest, or easily can find one from the deck. So yeah, I think the risk of not being able to get those free eggs certainly feels lower with something like the cuckoo compared to, say, the cowbird in the base game.
Yeah, definitely. I think the upgrade here is definitely welcome. And like you say, yeah, you pointed out nicely that you can play this in the forest as a filler. I like that as well.
Absolutely. All right, so we have two more birds to take a look at. We've got the snow bunting and the goldfinch. So these work similarly in that you are going to be getting tuck cards when another player tucks a card. But in the case of the snow bunting, it's going to be tucking a card from your hand and drawing a replacement. And from the goldfinch, you're just tucking from behind the deck. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on being able to get extra points when your opponents tuck cards?
I think this is a really nice ping power because tugging is just such a universal like mechanics that use in almost like every strategy in Wingspan because you have a lot of birds with brown power that allows you to tuck cards, and then I assume like hunting are counted as well for this.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's the point I was going to come on to because I think when
yeah.
I first played with these birds, I didn't
Mhm.
factor in, the tucking birds like peregrine falcon, for example. I only
Right.
thought about things like the barn swallow or the bush tit that are that flocking power. But yeah,
Yeah.
you also get the tuck on successful hunts, so certainly gives you more potential for getting points there.
Yeah, and with the European expansion, there's also quite a few
Mm,
teal power bird that also activate tugging. I don't know. Does round end power activate ping power?
I don't think they do.
Okay, all right. Well, that's good to point out. They
Mm.
don't. But all the other tugging, you get a tug, so that's nice.
Yeah, I think really these birds were kind of introduced alongside all of those additional tucking birds as a bit of a
hmm
counter. So, like you say, there's lots of really strong brown powered birds and even white powered birds in the European expansion that
Right.
are really centered around getting lots of tuck cards. So
hmm
these are a good counter to those, but equally, like you talked about in the base game, tucking fits well into any kind of strategy. Getting that extra
Right.
card cycle through the flocking birds, but getting extra points through hunting powers as well. That can be really strong. And yeah, in both of these cases, being able to get extra points when your opponent is scoring points, that's a really nice option to give yourself.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, now that you mention it, I just remember how like in base game, tugging engine is just so strong. Say
Mm.
like if your opponent has like, multiple tug power in one habitat, it really make that engine really strong. And these are really nice counter to those. I see as a way like if you have a bunting, you kind of neutralize like one of your opponent tugging bird in terms of like point scoring potential. So that's going to add lots of interesting strategy to the game.
Absolutely. So I'm going to ask you the same question as for the
Yes.
pink food powers.
Yeah.
Which of these two pink tucking birds do you prefer?
I think looking at these two birds as a whole, I think I have a slight preference for the snow bunting. One because the food cost it only costs two food, and I like the fact that you can gain the card back at the end, so you kind of cycle through cards and also making points. So I think it is more superior than the goldfinch. What do you think?
Yeah, I think snow bunting would be my pick. I mean, to be honest, these are both really
Mhm.
good birds. If I had
Yes.
both of them, I would play both of them. I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I wouldn't pick one or the other. But yeah, like you say, the snow bunting it is a slightly better points to food ratio. And yeah, just the ability to cycle cards. I think it's one of those kind of intangible values that you get from certain birds in Wingspan, where you're getting the obvious points from the tuck cards, but actually just being able to cycle through that deck a little bit
Yes.
quicker is yeah certainly going to help you out to find those big point birds that you want to be playing.
Yeah, and one thing I like about the snow bunting as well, and I guess when we are looking at new power, one thing I pay attention is when they say draw, you have to look at whether it say draw from the deck
Mm.
or from the tray. But this seems like there's no limitation, so you can draw from the tray if there's any good birds in the
Absolutely,
tray.
absolutely, and yeah, being able to draw from the tray on an opponent's turn is
Yeah,
such a strong thing. I think particularly, when you've got a lot of players in a game, 4 or 5 players, it can take a while to come back round to your turn. So if something
yeah.
good is revealed in the tray, you might not get a chance to see it. But with something like the snow bunting, yeah, certainly there's options there to be able to draw from the tray when there's a nice bird, even when it's not on your turn.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, but at the same time, it is at the end of their turn. So if
Right.
there's like obviously good bird, is more likely gonna be gone. But there could be
Yeah.
other birds that just fit for your board that you can potentially pick up.
Exactly. I think it's all going to be situational, but there's certainly potential there to yeah be able to get some extra birds that you might look to play.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's all of the new pink powers. So, any final thoughts on how these pink powers compare to the sort we have in the base game of Wingspan?
I personally I am just very excited about all this new ping powers. I think when I think of ping power from base game, I'm just trying to recall like most of them are pretty much just center around getting free eggs.
Yeah.
So I like that, with the expansion, there's potential to use ping power to gain food and also cycle cards. And again, is they also add a lot of counter to like traditional engine. For example, like with the goldfinch and the bunting is a nice counter to tugging engine. And then if someone is running a forest engine, then you have the oriole and tree sparrows. So yeah, definitely add more balance to the game, and I like that.
Yeah, I have to agree. It's similar to the new teal powers we looked at before. I just think these are really refreshing powers, and like you say, they might look like they're just another bunch of pink powers, but I think they have potential to involve some new strategies as well. But yeah, thanks very much for joining me, Tay Ray. Like I said, we took a look at teal powers in part one, so definitely check out that video over on Tuck and Cash, and subscribe to both channels to stay up to date as we continue with this European expansion bootcamp and take a look at other new elements in the European expansion. So, thank you very much for watching.
Yeah, thank you.